Good morning. Good morning. That's so beautiful. They gave me a handheld mic, so I feel like maybe I should sing. My fourth grade music teacher had everyone in my fourth grade music class stand up and sing, and then divided us into singers and non-singers. Which, by the way, if any educators here, is a horrible thing to do to a 10-year-old. So I was put in the non-singer group, but I became very good at the triangle and the tambourine. I was like the Linda McCartney of my fourth grade music class. Well, welcome back. Raise your hand if you were not here yesterday. See if any new folks. Raise them high and proud. Could people who are next to them just shake their hands and say good morning and welcome? Maybe a high five, fist bumps. I'm trying to bring Raise the Roof back, but I've not had much luck with that. Thank you. Some roof raisers out there. We had a full day yesterday. Is anyone tired? Energized, but tired? My friend was a good friend was a high school teacher. He had a student in his social studies class. The last period every day would say, "Mr. King, stick a fork in me, I'm done." So our goal today, if we do our jobs well, is that you will all leave here and say, "Stick a fork in me, I'm done." Because we will have filled you up with inspiration, ideas, connections. So yesterday was a full day, right? Right, so we were challenged in the morning to step into this community with courage and with empathy. To pay attention to pronouns. Did you find yourself listening to pronouns yesterday? Looking for the we's, the us's. We heard from amazing young entrepreneurs last night and welcomed a new class of fellows into the Ashoka family. Sorry, there's a typo on my speaking points. We talked, we laughed. I noticed just a few of you danced last night. I won't mention names. And we told our stories, right? We told our stories in 6 words. We told our stories over 6 beers. We connected with one another. We built relationships. So I'm just curious. I'm just going to invite folks to raise their hand. Raise your hand if you met someone new yesterday. Nice. Okay, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you reconnected with an old friend, someone you haven't seen in a while. Okay, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you had an aha moment, like just a moment of inspiration. Anybody want to share theirs? You all raise your hands. I can come and call on you. I got a mic. I can travel. This is power.
I'm Gail Arnell, Director of Offender Aid and Restoration, and I was thinking, I've often said there are 2.4 million people locked up in our country, but what I realized is there's 67 million people in our country that have a criminal record. That's 1 in 4 adults, and I've been thinking too small.
Anyone else want to share an aha moment? Big, small? You're not gonna make me run. I'm too old for this.
My name is Angela Myers, and I learned about you literally just 48 hours before I came here. And the second I was on your website, I jumped on a plane, and I feel like I'm in the presence of a miracle. But this is an ordinary miracle because you are ordinary individuals, and I mean that in the most loving way. We are ordinary individuals that believe in miracles, and us being together and me being able to bear witness and to be here in your presence is an ordinary miracle. So, thank you.
Thanks. Did anyone make a transformative connection with another person? Raise your hand if you met someone who you're like, damn, I want to be like you when I grow up. Anybody want to call anyone out that they met? People are afraid to raise their hands now. You want to be like me? Can you put that in writing for my mother? She would appreciate that. Anyone else want to just name someone that they met that has felt transformative to them while they've been here? Yep, shout it out.
I had a quick opportunity to meet Nancy and Peter Mortefi here from Canada. Just moved graduations around in their schedule, just
Anybody else want to share a transformative moment, person from yesterday, before we get started? Anybody fall in love? Any love connections? I'm a Yenta, by the way, so I'm happy to do my part. I want to share a quick reflection about yesterday, and then I want to introduce our amazing woman who's leading our panel today. Raise your hand. Have any of you seen the movie or the play Amadeus by Peter Schaefer? Okay, enough folks. There's this beautiful reference in it. So I just want to share my experience yesterday. So I'm an Ashoka fellow, and I run a global organization teaching young kids how to be peacemakers. But my role here is to be supportive of you all building community. So I've been holding back in a way that I wouldn't normally, which has been actually nice, because I've had the joy of bearing witness to what I've been seeing. And there's this wonderful moment in the play where Peter Schaefer writes, this is Amadeus talking, he's comparing the difference between being a playwright and a composer. And he talks about how if you're a playwright, you have to write things down one at a time. So-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. But composers get to put all those things down at once, and you get to hear all of them at the same time. And so I was watching yesterday during some of the breaks, and so Amadeus, Peter Schaefer's writing, says, I wonder if that's how God hears the world, right? Millions of sounds ascending at once and mixing in his ear to create an unending music unimaginable to us. And that is our job, right? That's our job, to create that cacophony of ideas. That's what we did yesterday, right? So that's what we need to do today. Tell your stories, have fun, take risks, build relationships. The woman I'm about to introduce you to is a risk taker, is an entrepreneur, is a mom, is a DC resident. Imagine she's a good cook? No? Married well. Roberta is a tireless advocate for the power of the press to tell transformative stories. Right? Many of us have a romantic notion of the press as being a fighter for our freedoms, an exposure of untruths, someone who can speak back to people in power. And Roberta embodies that. She embodies that in the work that she's done, from CBS at 48 Hours to now with Bill Moyer, 2020, the local affiliates of ABC, CBS here in DC. But she also does in the connections that she makes, right? Connecting to other journalists, encouraging them. And she's at this interesting chapter in her life, which she's going to talk about, which is, for years her job was to find the bad stuff, right? That's what great journalists do, right? They shine a light on problems that we need to see. And now she's exploring the other part of that equation. How do we lift up those stories of transformation? How do we lift up those stories of power? How do we tell the stories that take place in these rooms and around kitchen tables and church pews around the world, where citizens are gathering together and not just trying to ask questions to solve problems, but joining together to transform the way that we actually look at the world in which we inherit? She's also a proud mother. And her daughter Vanessa's here. Where's Vanessa? Who, by the way, is looking for a job. So another matchmaking thing. If anyone's looking for a brilliant recent college grad, come see Vanessa or her mother, and we will make a connection. But what I have enjoyed most about our conversation, Roberta, is that you're someone who believes ideas and principles only live if they're put in action. So I want to welcome you up here to let you welcome the panel. And for the rest of us, as we listen to this panel, we hear a lot about the news and about the media, but I want you to listen to what's changing, because there is something that's changing about the way that we tell stories, and the folks that you're going to get to meet are leaders in that. And that's really the theme of the day. And we're particularly fortunate to have the Monitor streaming this on their website. So it's not just the folks in this room, but actually people all over the globe who are going to be able to hear and engage with the stories we have today. So, Roberta.
Thank you. Well, my name is Roberta, and I'm a recovering journalist. I started out in Chicago in local news, which is famous around the world for its corruption. So it was a spectacular place to begin as an investigative reporter. And it was a long time ago, more than 30 years ago, because I worked in film. So, and I also did a lot of undercover reporting, and the cameras were this big, the undercover cameras, which had gotten smaller and smaller and smaller till they became like buttons and eyeglasses. I'm looking at all of you. So I've been through a long transition in investigative reporting. And in Chicago, the crews called me Bad News Baskin, because if it was bad, I was on it. And that was my MO. And in the transition of being a journalist, which, you know, I think we old folks tend to look back on the golden years of investigative reporting, when there was a lot of money being thrown around, a lot of resources and support for it. But actually, a story that I haven't told before is I was fired in my first job in Chicago. And the reason that the news director fired me was he said, "You're an advocate, not a reporter." And it was like I had a scarlet A on my chest. And I had been, I mean, my MO had always been corporate misconduct. Those were the stories that I was attracted to, because they affect all of us. And yet it was not the kind of story that advertisers like. And so I was fired over a story that I was pitching too hard to the news director on beer, on cancer-causing agents in beer. I had learned that there were nitrosamines in beer. Cancer. This is, don't worry, you who had your 6 beers last night. This was 1981, so you probably weren't even born then. But I wanted to test beer, and just 3 beers, and the news director was just like not interested in what was going to erupt from this story and what a pain in the ass it would be for him in terms of beer being the #1 advertiser on television. So he fired me, called me an advocate, and I wept for the entire weekend. I thought my life was over. I, didn't know what I was going to do. I basically scraped myself off the floor on Sunday night, and I wrote up a 1-pager about this beer story. Instead of saying I wanted to test 3 beers, I said I want to test 18 beers. And I put a little C at the bottom of the page, like I had copyrighted the story, and I went over to the #1 station in town and pitched it to them and said I want to go to Germany because the Germans discovered the problem and they know how to fix it. The Americans are lying about it. They're saying that it's not a big problem. And we'll show that it's easy to fix. They said, great. So I went from the #3 station in town that had fired me for being an advocate to the #1 station in town that gave me 5 weeks to do this story. We tested 18 beers. How many of you are beer drinkers? Yeah. 1 bottle of Heineken was equivalent to 175 slices of bacon at the maximum legal level of nitrosamines in bacon in a year that the USDA had shut down 3 bacon plants for having levels that were considered hazardous to your health. So in terms of the power of television, and they copyrighted the story too, which is interesting. So Johnny Carson made jokes about it on The Tonight Show, and Walter Cronkite gave this station, WLS, credit for it in Chicago. And what really made a difference is Coors, the beer it was the one beer that had already switched its malting process so that they didn't have nitrosamines, took out full-page newspaper ads in the Wall Street Journal saying, Coors, the beer with no nitrosamines in it. FDA set a standard, and it was all fixed within 6 months, cleaned up beer.
Wow.
Nice. Well, the point of it is on a good day, journalism can change the world. And I think that journalists are attracted to becoming journalists because you feel like you can do good in the world. But at the same time, there's this tension about advocacy and journalism. And we have morphed into a time where the business model, we all, in the old days, used to gather around the hearth of television for the 6 o'clock news and watch The Most Trusted Man in America, all of us getting the same story. And now we have hundreds of places to point our eyeballs and to listen. And so it's a very different ecology out there. And the business model is broken. And I've been to more conferences than I can count, actually, about who's going to pay for the next news. And nobody's quite figured that out. But there are a lot of people in this room who are philanthropists who are supporting media during this transition time. And so in my older age, and looking back and looking forward, I think that we're in this amazingly exciting time. It's a renaissance time. I mean, out of the destruction of who's going to pay for the next news, and all the chaos out there, and all the exciting technology tools that we have out there, this is an extraordinary time for you, for change makers. And we have an amazing panel that I want to welcome. Please come up, David Bornstein and June Cohen and Jonathan Wells. And I'm going to start, we're going to end with David Bornstein. David Bornstein, who so many of you know because he is a rock star. New York Times reporter, columnist, author, change maker, who has co-founded Solutions Journalism, which sounds like advocacy.
Solutions Journalism
Solutions Journalism Network, and we will talk about solutions. June Cohen, how many of you, executive producer of TED Talks, how many of you have done a TED Talk? Wow, not surprised. How many of you have done a TEDx talk? Great. How many of you would like to do a TED Talk? Come on, raise your hands high. June, take note, okay?
I want all of them to do
Yeah, no, there are some great stories in this room. And Jonathan Wells is the old school, old newspaper man.
Thank you very much.
Publisher.
When June told me that this was the role I was going to play, I said, well, at least I dressed the part, June. So
They all dressed the part, you
really,
know? We got
central casting. So
It is, yes. So, all right. So, this old newspaper man, Jonathan Wells,
we can move on from that.
That has been around for more than 100 years. And Jonathan has really had to grapple with some tough questions and some tough issues and challenges in terms of making ends meet at the kind of newspaper that, you get ink stains. So talk a little bit about, it was 6 years ago that, what made you decide not to do a daily newspaper?
Well, for those of you that track the media news business, you all know the challenges that we've been through. And so actually the lead up to moving out of daily news into weekly print and a digital focus has a bit of an interesting background. And if I can, I'm going to do the 1-minute history on the Christian Science Monitor for those of you that are less familiar with it. So here's the 1-minute history. Got to take notes quickly. So it's 1907, and there's a New England woman by the name of Mary Baker Eddy who has started a church. She's a pretty controversial figure. And Joseph Pulitzer, who's running the New York Daily World, says, I am taking her on. And he gets several...
You get the irony. The Pulitzer guy is
Right.
taking on the Christian side. Well.
And so he gets several people to sue her for incompetence, to just try to put her out of business. And 1 year later, she goes on to start something called the Christian Science Monitor. And she does this in part in response to this experience of the YOLO journalism of the day. And she goes, wait a minute, shouldn't we be thinking differently about the role of journalism? This is 1907. And she starts the Christian Science Monitor. And everybody says to her, whatever you do, don't call it the Christian Science Monitor. And she says, well, but there's a certain integrity that I want to preserve in terms of who we are and what we come out of. So fast forward now to 2008. The Monitor is celebrating its centennial. It's 100 years old. And you would think we would have a moment to look back and say, hey, not too bad. But no, the landscape has changed remarkably. Now, in that 100 years, the Monitor has remained a small, but I think, news organization of some integrity. We've attempted to work on a global and maintain a global perspective. We've approached the news with rigor, but in an attempt to be constructive. And frankly, in the 70s and 80s, we were using the term solution journalism to a small degree and thinking about how do we tell stories that are constructive and provide context. 7 Pulitzer Prizes, 12 Overseas Press Awards.
Pulitzer Prizes.
Pulitzer Prizes, thank you, Joseph Pulitzer. But now in 2008, it is just a radically different landscape. And the Monitor, like many other news organizations, is in trouble. In fact, we're not quite sure how we're going to survive and move forward. And what has happened, of course, is the tsunami of the internet and digital. And news readers and news intake people are moving out of print rapidly onto the web and into digital. Our print circulation has fallen by 60%, and advertisers are following readers. So it is just an unsustainable proposition. And the Monitor says, well, one of the things we want to do is be with where readers are. And so we make what was at the time a wrenching decision to say we're going to go where readers are. We're going to stop daily print after 100 years. We hire a guy by the name of John Yema, who was with the Boston Globe and had worked in the digital space with the New York Times as our new editor. We marshal our resources to move into the digital space with the premise that we need to be part of the daily news conversation. I mean, that was the working assumption. But now you have to do that while maintaining what we've hoped were our core values in this space, and it was very difficult.
I want to say some of your core values that I found on the web that I just found really interesting. Truth is the beginning of solutions.
Right.
Resist the sensational in favor of the meaningful. What a concept. And unrelenting but fair.
That's our framework for approaching the news in the world.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty beautiful. Yes. Okay, now you have come up with a new kind of mission statement that you are all sworn to secrecy.
Right.
I will have to kill you if you say it outside of this room because it's not public yet. But it's really elegant in its simplicity.
Okay.
You say it.
I will, but there's a 1 minute lead up to that. So,
Okay.
So I'm going to just finish the chronology of, so you're now publishing daily online, but the business model now, because remember we have to tie our mission and our business models together. The business model now is big web. We go from 1 million viewers and 3 million page views to 11 million viewers and 50 million page views in 4 years, all good. But remember that model now is ad-based. And so there's only so much revenue you can generate from that pure ad-based model on the web. And so once again, as the print business model was failing, the actual today's web model is failing. And so we're now moving into a new space, which leads up to your question, which is, what are you guys doing now?
Yes.
So we thought, well, what is the impact we're having on our readers? What is the impact we want to try to have on our readers? And it seems to us as though while the big web was great, we needed to be an instrumental part of people's lives. And we questioned really whether we were doing that. And this led us to think about, well, what are our people that read the Monitor, what do they want? Who are they? What do they want? And we recognized we had a large segment of people that we would call politically active citizens, citizen agents, a term that's probably somewhat familiar to you here at Ashoka. And we said we're not really serving them effectively, or as effectively as we could and should. So this led to a big internal think process where we go, the space that we're in now is actually become what we might call, for better or worse, a commodity news space. Can we shift out of that into a meaningful news space? And what would that mean? And we had this we brought in some folks to help us think this through, and they said, you guys have to think about one simple thing that you are. Really hard to do. One simple thing that you are. And we recognized that to date we had been about knowledge. And the challenge we asked ourselves was, could we shift from knowledge as a news organization to a new concept that we call movement? Could our one simple thing actually become movement? Could we inspire movement of thought and action? You have to understand, in a news organization, very traditional legacy news organization, these are huge questions. And I can remember being in the room when the editor said, and he and I were talking it through, and we had a group of senior staff around us, and we said, we're going to go from knowledge to movement. And it was like, wow. It was like a huge mental shift. So that led to, okay, if we're going to try to inspire movement of thought and action, we're going to try to explain a meaningful news space, what are we trying to enable people to do? Now I'm answering your question.
Think, share, and do. Just those 3 words.
Think more deeply, share more readily, and do more to have an impact on the world. Now the monitors had a long history of doing a pretty good job, I believe, of think. Some experience with social media, et cetera, and share. Do is a whole new thing. And our newsroom and our news staff said, hey, you guys just made us go through this wrenching cultural change of being effective on the web and digitally. And now a journalist is responsible for gathering an audience, right, and retaining them, and some page view growth. Now you're going to make us think about do. What the heck does this mean?
Is there pushback from them in terms of the concern about what that means in terms of their values as journalists?
We're right, because Dave and I were talking about this before. Every day these folks show up, I mean, they're not highly paid, right? And they're deeply dedicated. And they have a great sense of mission of what they do, and they have a strong sense of ethics. So this whole concept, as we began to have these internal conversations about think, share, and do, the do part was really hard. Really hard to figure out, well, what does that mean we're going to do? And to be candid with you, we haven't figured it out yet. We've experimented in some really concrete ways. One of the things we've done is a partner with Ashoka on driving our politically active readers into Ashoka forums and changemaker forums. But the space we're now is all about what does it mean and how do we act on it. I can tell more about that, but I'll be quiet for now.
Okay, I'm going to move to June, who, if you think about what she's done with TED Talks, that it's become a universal verb, basically, in less than 10 years. Taking these very kind of precious and you were so lucky if you could afford to be in the room at the mothership for a TED Talk, and this kind of heretical idea that, oh no, we're just going to give it away, you know? Well, first let's start. Is the best thing that happened is that the networks turned you down? That it wasn't suitable for television?
I actually do think that was the best thing that ever happened to us. And so to give you the 1-minute history of TED before that, it's just that, so TED, many of you may know, TED just began as a conference in 1984, actually, and it was focused on technology, entertainment, and design. That's the TED in TED. And TED brought together speakers from those disciplines initially, but eventually grew to have speakers for anyone with an idea worth spreading. The speakers came to the stage, they gave a talk very short, 18 minutes or less, hopefully the talk of their lives, but no pressure. And, but TED from the beginning was a very closed system. It was very expensive, it was elite, and what happened at TED stayed at TED. And in 2000, my boss, Chris Anderson, bought TED and turned it into a nonprofit. And in 2005 began thinking he really wanted to open up TED to the world, and that's when I came on board to work with him. And the notion was that these talks they deserved a wider audience, that there was only so much impact you could have when you were only speaking to 1,000 people in a room, no matter who those people were. And so we made this decision. Initially, Chris, we were working on a pilot to bring to TV stations, and nobody wanted. I mean, there could not have been less interested in the world of TV in what they were considered taped lectures. And when the BBC told me it was too intellectual for them, I said, I think it's time to change strategies. But we were really lucky in that this was right at the moment that online video is taking off. So YouTube had been out for just under a year. When we made this decision, it was right when the video iPod was just released. So we were really just getting used to the idea of online video. And so instead of going to TV, we put the talks online, and that was really where they were meant to be in the first place.
Did your colleagues feel sorry for you that you were going to take down the business model of TED by taking this very
Everyone felt
exclusive
sorry
thing
for
and
me.
just like share it with the world?
It was one
Who's
of
going
those,
to come?
It's so interesting because now TED Talks have sort of become part of the online ecosystem, but at that moment, 7 years ago, no one thought this was a good idea. I mean, honestly, nobody thought this was a good idea.
It's not an idea worth sharing.
No, I mean, you know, and you've all had this experience when you're working on a project and you're going to meet with people you could collaborate with you, and they're giving you that polite, I feel really sorry for you look. Like they're like, that's great, this project's never going to happen. There were several problems. One is that taped lectures did not seem like a big idea to anyone. It didn't seem likely to anyone that there would be a large audience for taped lectures. And certainly not online, where nobody watches anything that's more than 3 minutes,
right,
supposedly. But the bigger problem was that was the worry that this would capsize our business model. So conventional wisdom would tell you that when you have an elite, a luxury product, like a very expensive conference, you have to keep like your commodities scarce and your prices high. The worry was that once we started releasing all of the content online for free, that nobody would want to pay $4,000 to come to the conference anymore. And that was a very real risk to us. It wasn't that we poo-pooed that. We actually thought that was a very likely outcome of putting the talks online, that we would have fewer people coming to the conference. But Chris was really willing to take that risk on. We thought, well, TED sells out. If there's a little less pressure on us, then that's fine. Our goal here is not to make money. It's to spread ideas.
So what happened when you went online and I picture your eyes twirling in your head at night, wondering if anybody will sign up to be in the mothership?
Yeah.
What happened?
So a couple of interesting things happened on that front. What happened was precisely against conventional wisdom. So in the same year that we started putting all of our content online for free, we raised our prices by 50% to $6,000.
How crazy is that?
And we sold out in 1 week with a 1,000-person waiting list. And TED had always sold out, but sort of slowly over the course of the year, not in a single week, and certainly not with a waiting list. It was a completely new era. And I think part of that is that there is a real, it's sort of obvious now looking back on it. Once more people knew about the conference, knew about the talks, they had a desire to experience it in person. They didn't want to just watch them online, although many people are prefer watching online or are very happy watching online, and that we take that as a credit. We were hoping for that.
You talk about that you're giving a lecture. This is way beyond giving a lecture. This is like, talk a little bit, take us behind the curtain about what goes into creating these lectures in terms of the direction, editing, rehearsing, whatever you do to make them spectacular.
So 2 pieces, and one thing in the lead up to that I didn't mention, that after we put the talks online, and some of you already know these numbers, the thing that really amazed us was and this is related to how we guide the speakers, was the broadness of the appeal. So we did imagine that our audience would be kind of a geeky audience that really loved school and loved learning, and probably everyone in this room, including me. That's how we pictured our audience. We pictured a small, devoted audience like that, and it's not. It's so much broader. The devoted audience of TED Talks, they're truck drivers and yoga instructors and stay-at-home moms and police chiefs in Bombay, and plenty of geeks like me in there as well. But that broadness has been really interesting to us, and one of the things they've told us is that everybody loves to learn. They may not consider themselves smart, they may not have loved school, but when they're in the presence of a passionate speaker, talking to them about something that they care about, that they may have thought was out of reach for them, but that they're understanding and getting excited about, it really turns something on inside of them. And that's how we guide our speakers, is first of all that you're trying to reach an intelligent general audience, and that means 2 things. It means you're not a scientist talking to scientists, you're a scientist talking outward, so you have to lose the jargon of your field and really try to bring people in, but to never dumb down. You don't have to water it down, you can actually let the audience stretch up for it. And then our process of guiding the speakers is actually, in some ways, old school journalism. It's really helping them find the idea. We work with our speakers like an editor and a writer would. We help them think about who their audience is, what their key idea is, and really focus it in, because in 18 minutes or less, you have to be very focused in what you're trying to deliver. But then beyond that, every TED Talk is individual. We really discourage our speakers from trying to crack the code or follow the model of, oh, I have to have an opening anecdote and then I have to try to make them cry and I have to have some surprise prop. And that's not what, like a brain or mosquitoes, or occasionally that will work, but what really works is having a really strong idea that you're passionate about and telling the story in a way that's authentic to you.
So bringing it into an international audience, people speak other languages from English out there. How did you manage that?
That transition. So it's interesting. From the moment we started putting the talks online, we began getting these really interesting and curious emails from around the world. So some of them, of course, were just the passionate, oh, not of course, but to our surprise and delight, were these passionate emails saying, this talk has changed my life. I'm so moved by this. And that let us know that we were really reaching people online, that you could get something that worked on the stage to also work on video, which was a question that we had. But what was more interesting is that people were motivated to take the next step, that once they watched the talk, they wanted to somehow be involved. And we started getting these emails asking us about subtitling the talks, but they didn't, nobody ever asked us to subtitle the talks themselves. What they were asking is to help us subtitle the talks. They would write in and say, I speak Polish, I would love to translate these talks for you. I speak Hebrew and I've subtitled this talk. Here. And literally, and these emails we were getting were becoming more and more insistent, and I bet some of you have experience in the room, until finally they were like, here's what we want you to do. We want you to launch a volunteer translation project where anybody can help you subtitle the talks. And
That is audience engagement.
Yeah, we're like, finally we were just sort of battered into it. We're like, okay, we'll launch this project. And so 4 years ago, we launched a volunteer translation project. It allows anyone around the world to translate the talks into their own language. There are a lot of steps we put into place to ensure quality, but I'll leave that out just for speed. And we launched it 4 years ago, hoping one day we'd have maybe 100 translators. And 4 years later, we have more than 10,000 translators. They've done 40,000 translations in more than 100 languages. So there are 20 languages in which our entire archive functionally is translated. And next week, fingers crossed, next month in any case, we'll be launching the first translated version of TED.com itself. Our Arabic site, ar.ted.com, will launch in just a few weeks' time, also volunteer-driven.
One last thing before moving on to David, and you moved into taking an idea worth sharing and doing a conference around it. And what's the intent of that, and what's come out of it? Like oceans.
Oh, okay, I'm just serious thing. So one of the things, and this is mirrors some of the things that you're thinking about in your organization as well, and I know you're thinking about, David, is that once people watch a talk, they're often inspired and they want to do something next. And so this is something that we also hear from our audience all the time. They're inspired. Help us take the next step. Right. Help us contribute to this cause. Help us help this speaker. Sometimes it's help TED itself. And for the several years, we've been focusing largely on opening up and allowing people to contribute to TED. There's two things that we're doing on the other front, though. It started with the TED Prize, which was launched in 2005. The idea of the TED Prize was to choose one talk a year and kind of rally the resources of the TED community around that one winner and that one talk and help that wish come true. And for example, one of them was Sylvia Earle several years ago, who was the famous ocean explorer. Her wish was to help save the oceans. And we held an entire conference based around that Mission Blue. It was held on a ship and designed to kind of bring outcomes directly from that talk. But what we're looking at now is how do we extend that farther? How do we create a platform on TED.com and beyond that allows people, when inspired by a talk, to take the next step, to take some action? And so we've been working really closely actually with the Knight Foundation, which is lovely to be in the Knight Conference Center as well, on how to make that work, because I feel like it is the critical question presented to almost everyone in media today. How do you get an audience to take the next step? Is it appropriate to try to take an audience to the next step? How do you keep your identity as
what's your role
media
in that
organization?
Process,
right. And we tend to think of ourselves at TED as a media organization as catalysts. And that's the context in which we're exploring this. And we can probably get into this more later, but it's one of the biggest questions on our mind right now is how do you facilitate that interaction between audience, speaker, and action?
Right, okay. David, Bornstein works at the New York Times, where it's very who, what, when, where, why. And you are doing something very different. Your mission at Solutions Journalism Network is who is solving what and how. How do you do that coming out of the values that you have as, you know, being at the old gray lady, New York Times, and avoiding the A word, advocacy?
You know, it's really just great journalism. I mean, we kind of say that, you know, I mean, if you're a reporter and you come to a room like this and you talk to, you know, 20 people over the course of 2 days, you come back with 20 amazing ideas and stories, and you think, why am I not allowed to cover these stories? So, you know, and I always think that it's kind of like Newton's law of motion. Like every you know, force engenders a counterforce. Every problem engenders a variety of responses to those problems. Some of them are great and brilliant. Some of them won't work. Some of them are worth trying. Why can't, you know, the journalists say I'm allowed to cover the problems, and then I go home for dinner and my job is done. And so the first question is, why can't you cover the responses as rigorously as you've covered the problems? Which is to say, report on the activity and report on what happened. And if it turns out a year later that it didn't work, report on that too. But basically just cover the other half of the story. And we often just call it the other half of the story.
Does it make the problem look even worse if you're just doing a story about problems, as I was so attracted to? If you show a solution to the problem, the bad guy looks worse because it could be done right.
Well, this is the whole thing about, you know, it's like journalism. I often, you know, I've said it's kind of like really bad parenting, you know, in the sense like, I mean, if you think of it's the theory of change of journalism, I have a 9-year-old son. It's like, I want you to be a better person, so I'm going to point out your shortcomings every morning at breakfast. Yeah, you know, like, so 20 years from now, you'll be the best life you can be, kind of thing, right? If you actually like hold journalism up to what we know about behavior change, what we know about neuroscience, there's no theory of change here. If journalism was a big nonprofit, which it is becoming, you wouldn't give it a grant. You'd say the theory of change doesn't work. It's not in line with what we know about human nature and blah, blah, blah. So what is the theory? You know, Chekhov's theory of change was, you know, man will become better when you show him what he is like. That's what his idea behind his plays were. So for journalists, it should be like, society will become better when you show it where it's going wrong and how it can do better. And how it can do better is just all of that landscape of reporting. The reason why solutions journalism now is so much more viable than it was, I mean, for years as a journalist, I was sort of being told I was on the Mother Teresa beat. And that is not a compliment in journalism.
Right. No.
Elsewhere it may be, but which is to say, you know, it's sort of, you know,
It's good for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, there's no path to Pulitzer Prizes. It's good, exactly. And you know, in fairness, there's a lot of solutions journalism imposters out there. There's the fluffy news story. There's the feel good, the XYZ heroes, and so forth. But you know, what we're saying is in fact, you know, this reporting, you know, for you know, we're saying like, why don't people pay for news? Why won't people pay for news? It's kind of silly. People will pay $5,000 to go to a conference. People will pay $50,000 a year to go to a university and put themselves in debt for many, many years. People yearn for knowledge that helps them powerful towards their self-chosen goals. Everywhere you go, you'll find people shelling out money left and right for that. And we're saying, oh, we can't sell the news. It's crazy. I mean, you just have to report on these really powerful stories. But the thing is, it's not worthy stories. It's not about, this is broccoli, you should eat it because it's good for you. It's about just the way people want to watch a television show like House or finish the next chapter of Harry Potter, because how does Harry get out of this mess? It's the same thing. How, you know, I spoke to 5 people yesterday. How do you use a volunteer army to construct a family around a kid who doesn't really have a family? How do you reduce the dropout rate in schools? You know, how do you treat hepatitis C when you have 40,000 people and only a couple of doctors? These are incredible puzzles, and they're like howdunits.
Let's double click on education as an example on schools. How does solutions journalism cover schools with rigor?
Well, so we talk about, there's a lot of different ways you do it. One of the things that we love is this phrase, positive deviance. The typical journalism story, and journalists love data. There's a huge movement now to use with the open data movement to look at things and really try to find where's the evidence and what do we know about things. So the typical journalism MO is like, look at a data set, find the bad actors, and pounce on them, you know? Now, if you think, okay, like if you were in business and you wanted to improve your company, what would you do? If you were the CEO, you'd be like, who's our best salesperson? and let them talk to the other employees instead of just firing the worst salesperson, right? So what's the thing you do? You look at the data set and you find, where is a school that we would expect to have a high dropout rate that doesn't, that has 20% better dropout rate with the same demographics? And then you go there and you try to figure out, you try to sort of reverse engineer, what are they doing differently? It could be a random variation, but more than often, you'll find that there's something that they've done there that you can then describe and you can characterize. And the thing is, this is now knowledge. This is a teachable lesson. So it's not even a local story. It's not just unique to that community. You've created a global story with that. It's a much more powerful news product. And for anybody who's in education, it's a must read. You know, our columns, the Fixes columns, when we started them 2.5 years ago, Tina and I, Tina Rosenberg, my colleague, and Keith, by the way, Keith, can you put up your hand? Keith Hammonds is one of our other part of the, you were talking about being a recovering journalist. We are the support group for you, Solutions Journalism Network. When we started this and we presented it to the Times, we thought we had like 10 objections that we would sort of, you know, be prepared to sort of answer back to. And the number one was, well, do you think anyone will read this stuff? And my thought was like, you know, when I started writing about social entrepreneurship 10 years ago, there were 20 students in a room and nobody at the bookstores, you know, when you went to do your signing. And now it's like 1,000 students and 500 in a spillover room. There's definitely, I think journalism is the only business that hasn't responded to changing consumer tastes vis-a-vis people having agency and wanting to have a shaping effect on the world. So, and we found that with the columns, like half of them, I don't know if half of them, but a very high percentage of them become the most emailed on the top 10 lists and all that. And these are stories about homelessness and malaria and foster care. I mean, you know, my editor said to me, we've never had a story on foster care on the most emailed list, ever, you know? But it's not about foster care. It's about it's fixing foster care. It's a very different story.
How do you reach marginalized communities with solutions journalism, those that, you know, aren't reading the New York Times? And
so this is something that in the network we're really grappling with now. What is the implication for the community-based newspaper? We don't have that answer right now. My sense is that it's basically through two things that will happen, or sort of three things. One is covering those communities from the lens of what are the creative adaptive responses within those communities, bringing into that community creative adaptive responses in other communities that are useful to that community, and then creating engagement, which gets to the do, Jonathan, engagement around the tools of change. And this is journalists have historically tried to do engagement, but they've covered the problems, and then they ask people to engage around, this is the problem we've identified. What we're saying with solutions journalism is it's like that scene from the movie Apollo 13. How many people have seen Apollo 13? So remember this wonderful scene where they have to build a ventilator, and they have like 3 minutes to do it, and all they have are a bunch of plastic tubes. And the guys in Houston run in, they throw the tools on the table, they say, you have 3 minutes to create a ventilator, this is all they have in the command module or whatever. Well, that's what we're saying with solution journalism. People want to solve their problems, but what are the tools that are on the table? What are the models that have evidence and some you can report on them? So you put them on the table, and some of them are in your community, some of them may be in Bombay, some of them may be in Indianapolis, and you say, this is what is known. You just have a discussion now around solving a problem, but you begin the discussion with the potential that's there, what's known about solving the problem. We're just actually launching our first few engagement experiments starting in the fall, but we feel that the engagement around these, and personally from my own experience, is a very productive, constructive, non-polarizing conversation because it's about problem solving.
You're moving from deficit-based reporting, which is really the pattern that we've been repeating and been in for, except for the Christian Science Monitor, from the beginning, really, to really strength-based reporting. How do you scale it up? I mean, you're talking about supporting newsrooms. How are you going to do that?
So initially, we thought that the first 2 years would be arguing with people that this is legitimate, and just kind of getting people to say, okay, you're not, a horrible journalist.
Yeah. How do you make it credible?
How do you make it credible? First of all, you demonstrate it. You have demonstrations that show that this is actually really good journalism. It's journalism that people are proud of. You have really credible other journalists saying, these are some of the articles that I've done. I'm really proud of these articles, and I'm proud of the impact that they've had. So you create professional safety by having more and more examples. This is kind of how Ashoka created the idea of social entrepreneurship. You have these walking anecdotes, and you say, that person is what we mean. So we say, that article is what we mean, that video is what we mean. So you have those examples. But then we found that the argument to trying to persuade people that solutions journalism is something that you should be doing is not that hard anymore, because the business model is failing, journalists are miserable, the customer has walked away from the product, and there's this landscape of stories that you cannot ignore anymore that are just really good stories. So there's like almost nobody that can defend the status quo in journalism. Okay, so now that's 10 minutes into it. So then people are like, okay, we want to do it. How do we do it? And then the rest of it is like practical. Okay, well, there's a different way of sourcing these stories. There's a different way of vetting them. There's a different way of constructing the narrative. Where do you locate the conflict? There's all of these very practical, really interesting questions that the journalists love to discuss. And that's where we get into it. And then what it is, and it's a guided practice over time that becomes better and better. There's curriculum around it. There's data projects around, how do you identify positive deviance in health, in housing and homelessness, in all the different areas. And over time, you create a kind of an infrastructure around it that makes it really practical to do this, and then funding around it. And we believe this is actually a really, really good product for news organizations to be producing, because we think that it will really drive readership, because people want information that makes them feel powerful.
And that's what you're going to do. You're going to empower people and empower newsrooms.
Can I respond to David?
Yes, please do.
So David's got some outstanding and fascinating principles at work here, and one of them is a willingness to tell the whole story, because there is the context of the issue, but then there's the fuller development of the story that is absolutely legitimate. And the Monitor had to think about this. The Monitor's headquartered in Boston, and as you all know, we had the bombings during the marathon. And everybody's covering the marathon, and we're covering where the guys came from and what happened and what might have motivated them. And we realized at the same time that Boston as a community and various segments of the community are responding really effectively to heal that community and bring us forward. And first responders were unusually effective. We began to think, wait a minute, there's a larger story here, and it's about responding to terrorism. And there are communities all over the world that have a record of responding to terrorism in really effective ways that are devoid of rhetoric, sometimes devoid of revenge. They come together to move forward effectively. How is this happening? It's a completely legitimate story. So we did a whole cover story in the weekly publication on responding to terrorism and worldwide community responses to different incidents of terrorism, and it got a huge response nationally and internationally to this approach. So, I mean, the ideas that you're expressing here really have a lot of power behind them.
And Jonathan, you're doing something that is also counterintuitive to what all the other newspapers have basically, and I was at CBS when they were closing all the foreign bureaus and saying that Americans don't care about foreign news.
Right.
And I remember the headlines in newspapers across the country after 9/11, why do they hate us?
Right.
And I really felt like in some ways journalists had failed to tell Americans the story of the world and our place in the world. And now you have reporters, I mean, the foreign bureaus where you had people who had lived in a country, developed sources, spoke the language. Instead, now it's reporters when there's a disaster parachuting into a community, into some far-flung place, and really, having a hard time really doing a deep dive into where they should go. You have always covered international news, and it's kind of like for more than 100 years, it's been a focus. How do you do that? That's expensive.
It's very expensive, and perhaps finally our time has come. Who knows? But you had a few things going on. One, there has been a huge shift from many major news organizations out of international news. Expense is one of them. But certain factors are changing. One, 9/11 was a big shift. 2 wars, and a small example in our own headquarters cities of Boston, when the bombs went off at the end of the marathon, people wanted to say, what's going on and what was behind this, and maybe I need to understand something about Chechnya. And there is a remarkable shift now in world awareness, global implications, and the Monitor has tried to stay in that game. Now, admittedly, we don't have the number of bureaus we used to have, but we have concentrated on keeping enough boots on the ground to be able to tell the story effectively at the ground level and help people get the context they need to see the connect the dots that is part of almost every major story now.
June?
Yeah, one of the things it's interesting because this is an area we think about a lot at TED now. In that, and so two thoughts there. One is, as most newspapers have pulled back on their foreign bureaus, but it's interesting because with the rise of digital tools, which have in some way undercut the news organization, there's also a rise of all kinds of other networks to tap into. It's easier to find people on the ground around the world than it's been before. And we've had an interesting viewpoint at this at TED because an unexpected consequence of us releasing first the talks online and then opening up further is that we've kind of gone from being like just a conference in California to being a global media platform, and that's utterly changed us organizationally. And there's one note on that I want to make. So we, along with our translation program, when we launched the talks, we started to get emails from people around the world who wanted us to hold events in their country, in their city, come to Amsterdam, come to Beijing, and we're a very small organization, we couldn't do that, but we actually thought, we can't hold these events, but why can't they? And that's how we launched the Tedx network. We decided, there was such passion for these ideas, why can't we empower other people around the world to hold their own TED-like events? And
so what are the tools that you give to people around the world to have a TEDx event?
Well, they have,
again, giving it away, sharing seems to work as a business model.
Right, so they do each, of course, have to apply for a license. We don't charge for it or pay them to hold the event. And they have to follow very strict guidelines. So the event has to feel like a TED event, which means it's only individual speakers, no panels, nothing wrong with panels, it's just not a TED talk, it's different. So it's only individual speakers in 90-minute sessions or 105-minute sessions. The talks can't be commercial, they can't, sort of commercial in nature, or they can't sell from the stage, they can't be religious in nature, they can't be polarizing. They have to be in the spirit of spreading ideas, in the spirit of diversity, and there are a number of other guidelines. Your sponsors can't place a speaker on the stage. There's a sort of that separation of church and state. And then a lot of other guidelines and just suggestions for them of how to create an event that feels like TED. And what's been fascinating for us about that is that we now have this network of people around the world that we can call on and tap into to understand what's happening in the world. And we, many of these TEDx talks now appear on TED.com, and they're talks that we never would have found, people we never would have found. How did they stop traffic congestion in Copenhagen? How did they work on a water filtration system in Rajasthan? But they aren't, we're just coming at it from a different angle. It's not a top-down angle of going to find them. It's giving communities the tools to find their own stories and bring them out. And in doing so, we're actually following a lot of what you were saying really resonated, David, about the craft of solutions journalism. How do you tell the story in a way that people can hear? That oftentimes we were talking about this earlier, people who have a story they want to tell, they just want to talk about the issue or how horrible something is or how difficult it is. But what people want to hear, the way they hear it better, is through the lens of a solution, the optimistic viewpoint, which is often just a flip of the coin. And so that's one of the things that we try to guide and help our TEDx organizers guide their speakers to do, is flip from talking about this is a problem to talking about this is a solution.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, it's just such a great entry point, because first of all, when you talk about, if you can show that a problem can be addressed and is being addressed creatively, even if it's not being solved. I mean, some of these solutions are 2% solutions against 60-ton problems. They're efforts towards solving a problem. But it becomes illegitimate, one, to not do anything because you have something on the ground. And two, if it's an investigative piece, people can't just say, well, we couldn't do it, because you can point to things. And the third thing is, I did this presentation in front of 60 media organizations recently, and I was like, what's the most, from all around the world, and I said, what's the most universal narrative? And I found you could find detective stories from everywhere, and they're always really good sellers. And you think you think of, that's a genre, problem solving, figuring it, the how done it and all that. And you think, so the international story is a how done it. It's a how done it located in Nigeria or Bangladesh, but it's a really interesting story because people are problem solving. So something becomes a universal story, and it's not limited by the fact that there's such a sort of a wall of otherness there.
I love that. And it's funny because we had never talked about this before, but that's a metaphor that we use at TED as well. Whether it's a scientist speaking or a policy expert, we often tell them, tell a detective story. Tell us the story about how you figured this out and solved it. And then the speaker becomes a sort of a character in it, and the audience is brought into this how done it. Or, yeah, now I'll use that, the how done it. But it's a great metaphor to work with.
What's the how done it about how you're going to pay for solutions journalism?
You were going to ask me that question now?
Yes. How are you going to, because, the engagement part of it, people are, I think, desperate for solutions. They're tired. Every time that I ever talked about reporting that I'd done, there was always a hand that went up in the back of the room. Is there any good news? Is there anything good? What's the solution to this problem that you've uncovered? And people want solutions, but we have this broken business model at the same time that we have this technology where everybody in the room has a camera, too. And so, we're this bubbling up where it's probably making your job a little more easier, finding TED Talks from this bubbling up mechanism.
Yes.
So how are you going to pay for solutions journalism? Where does the...
So there's two, I think that there is going to be a transition period from now and a few years ahead, where many journalistic organizations, many newer organizations are going to sort of be experimenting with a new news product. Because we really firmly believe that, the news business is still basically selling Maxwell House instant coffee. It's still basically, people are not drinking it anymore, and they're like, we'll make it a digital version of this product. And the product itself is not a product that makes people feel powerful vis-a-vis the world.
And they're
really,
willing to spend $3.50 on a Starbucks coffee, but not spend the money on...
Yeah, and like I say, people spend on their education all the time. They just won't spend for news. So what they're basically saying is that the news is not educating me. Because if it was educating them vis-a-vis their self-chosen yearnings and pursuits, made them feel powerful vis-a-vis what they want to do, then they would pay for it. People pay for the Harvard Business Review because that solves their problems. That's one of the very successful publications. So we think that down the road, the business model is better news that people want to pay for. That's the way it should be. If it's not that, and there's a whole educational component to this. One of the offshoots of the Solutions Journalism Network is something called Fixes You, which is taking solutions journalism and repurposing it for course material, because these are essentially mini case studies that teach people how to be problem solvers, how to be change makers. And so we've had a lot of universities come to us and say, we use the solutions journalism because it's a great way to give the students familiarity with the creative problem solving. It's a great way to create a conversation around that in a class. It's very good for teaching. So we think there are also other clients for solutions journalism, because you're now creating a product that is, it's the tools on the table that people can have a conversation around. It's very productive. In the short term, we're grant funded.
So philanthropy has kind of come to the rescue, especially as the lens I look through is investigative reporting, and you have ProPublica and the Center for Public Integrity and investigative reporting, the Center for Investigative Reporting in San Francisco, and these models in various communities where philanthropy has stepped in to support it during this transitional period. But it's not a sustainable model.
Yeah, we need to create a critical mass of examples, just kind of like the TED Talks, where everybody now knows what a TED Talk is because they've seen 100 of them. You need to be able to have this identifiable product called solutions journalism, people who practice it now and then, who say, I know what that is, and then customers writing letters to the editor saying, you're not doing enough solutions journalism. So you create, it's kind of like the phrase microcredit, social entrepreneurship, solution journalism. You create a category, a thought category, and then people can discuss it and say, we want it, we don't like it, we want, but it needs to exist, and you have to have a sort of a critical mass of examples so people begin talking about it. And then editors, we already have more editors coming to us than we can handle now with our staff of 7, basically saying, can you work with us? So we're, we feel already that there's quite a lot of potential demand out there. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Because I would not give up on advertising. I'm actually still a huge proponent of the idea that when you're creating really quality journalism or really quality content that's attracting a really passionate audience, that there are partners and sponsors that will want to come along with you. So TED Talks, I mean, it's expensive spreading ideas actually, and the bandwidth costs, but we're entirely funded on the media side by partnerships. And what we find is that partners, as in sponsors, whether it's GE, IBM, AT&T, they want to be associated with positive change in the world. Actually, news in some ways is more problematic for them because who wants to be associated with drones, or drone bombing anyway, but to be associated with great solutions in the world, that's actually so much of the message that we find our partners are trying to bring. And so what we're exploring is both the different ways that those forms that those partnerships can take. So which ranges from helping the partners identify what's a change that they're making in the world, what's an idea that they want to spread, and bringing that out. So not just buy this thing, but here's a solution, here's something interesting, here's something creative for them to bring out. And also a lot of these large brands are now creating their own content. And so giving them a place that's cordoned off and identified, but allowing them to bring out some of their own kind of actually solutions journalism side by side with the content that we create. So anyway, I wouldn't give up on advertising yet. I actually think that there's a lot of potential there still.
Jonathan?
So funding solutions-oriented journalism is very difficult, and the Monitor is still not breaking even. We've cut our losses in half in the last 4 years, and we're on a glide path to be at break even in 4 years. But the whole relationship with your newsreader and consumer and your sponsor and advertising partners is completely changing. And so we've had to think that through. So on the relationship with the consumer, what we're thinking about is, okay, we have 11 million people coming to us every month. It's a low level of engagement, but it's some level of engagement. How do you create, through the sense that David and June have been talking about, people are looking for a sense of empowerment and the ability to take action intelligently. How in your content do you begin to show them, signal to them as they go deeper with you what those paths are and how they exist? And at some point, in some way, appropriately, that could become a transactional relationship. As you point out, people pay a lot of money to go to a conference. Number two, we've been experimenting with technology and technology-based solutions. One of the things we find that when we look at what people want to understand about politics in particular are, just give me the quick summary so I understand it, and then two, how do we move forward? And so we've partnered with a couple of firms in Cambridge to try something. One is called DC Decoder, which unlocks and explains DC politics quickly, and one is called a Do Something Box. It's a really interesting technology that allows people to say, I'm interested in this, show me a path to action, and people can actually vote solutions up and down. And sponsors, there's been enough engagement with that sponsors go, that's kind of interesting. Third, we've had to completely reframe the conversation with advertisers and sponsors. Banners and buttons are gone, dead, purely commoditized product. So what we've been trying to do is say, we're going to set about to find a long-term solution, a long-term conversation around, as an example, the relationship between fracking and the environment. And we're going to try to find intelligent solutions to those issues in that relationship. Do you want to help make that conversation possible? And sometimes a sponsor will go, you know what? That's in our long-term best interest to understand that. We'll come in. Now, we're in very early days here, very early days in all of this stuff. So we can't claim that it's all working. But this approach that the three of us are talking about in general, it is about a new relationship in media with both consumers, sponsors, and distribution.
So Jonathan, June, and David, close your eyes. We have 4 minutes left. I want you each to imagine what your media is going to look like in 5 years. And Jonathan, why don't you, in 5 years, what do you see for the Christian Science Monitor?
We'll still be
Think, share, do.
We'll still be covering the news. We'll still be covering general news. We probably will need to do that less expensively, but we will be building communities of intensity and intentionality. And around those communities of intentionality, probably around major topics, will be opportunities to engage with them more effectively, lead them into opportunities to share and do, possibly then into transactional relationships. And around those communities, you can have sponsor and advertising support. We will look considerably different than we do now. but we'll need to create a user experience that's really meaningful to them in this space.
I will subscribe to the Christian Science Monitor.
Thank you so much.
June.
I think that our Tedx network is going to grow into an incredibly important ecosystem for generating ideas, stories, and talks that bubble up, not just in English, but actually more than half of them, and probably at that point, probably 75% of them will be in languages other than English. Through the translator network, those talks will now, at that point, 5 years from now, will be widely and kind of wildly translated into other languages, often bypassing English. So a great idea in India can go straight, in a small village in India, can go straight to a small village in Brazil without us in New York ever having to decide that it was an important idea. And I think that network of kind of bottom-up storytelling and idea generation is going to be driving us as an organization. I think we're still going to be supported primarily by sponsorship, by advertising, but also with some foundation work to drive that forward. And I think that that network of idea generation is going to be connected much more directly to action taking, to the kind of solution step that comes next.
David, what does the Solutions Journalism Network look like in 5 years?
A practice network of journalists and editors around the world who are actively engaged around thinking about this practice, creating tools for one another, and constantly creating a constant flow of ideas, of stories in all different media, and a number, probably a few dozen very clear examples of publications that have adopted this on an ongoing basis and can speak to the way that a new relationship with their readership, potentially with, we hope, with some examples of how this is actually good for business. And a lot of really interesting new engagement models like events, problem-solving discussions that have become sort of part of the news process, and engagement with universities and policy centers where the output of journalism is these sort of knowledge products that feed very well into people who are thinking about public policy and people who are thinking about education. And really quite a lot of examples. And I don't think we'll have figured out the solution, the solution to solutions journalism. But I think that there's just going to be a very, very sort of rich ecosystem of experimentation with very, very positive responses from the readership, and also, by the way, the syndicators, the individual syndicators, all the bloggers and people out there who are amplifiers, helping individual citizen journalists to understand that if they're angry about something and they don't like a problem, the blogosphere is very negative. It's very negative and it's very, very partisan, that there are other ways to talk about these issues without trying to sort of push people into camps and so forth. And so educating the citizen journalism about this kind of storytelling will also be part of it.
It's the what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's what are the pathways? What are the observable, like even with the TED Talks, what's the do? Well, the do may not be we know that this is the do, but the do is here's 10 really great examples of pathways of doing. Choose your doing.
Choose your own.
But we're going to make it visible for you. We're going to help you find it. And we're going to help you understand what the evidence and the track record of these pathways are so that you can make a good decision.
Some of this reminds me of the positive psychology movement, that in the past, in psychology, it was always looking at what makes you angry, what gives you despair, why are you depressed? It's all about this sort of negativity that journalists have always been attracted to also. I mean, we're about what's wrong. And the positive psychology movement is about what gives you hope, what makes you feel loving, what makes you feel elevated. And people are attracted to that, and why not focus on that? I am also involved in a group for the last 12 years called Images and Voices of Hope, which is very counterintuitive to investigative reporting. But again, in my older age, I kept thinking about that, instead of leaving people with despair, how can you leave people with hope? And you heard it here first. In 5 years, in terms of the citizen engagement, and this is a movement that you're creating, and that all of you are sharing in. And I just want to thank David Bornstein, June Cohen, Jonathan Wells, for creating a world that is going to be just, full of ideas worth sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Eric Dawson is not coming up. My instructions are to lead you from this inspirational dialogue into whatever room you want to go into to get more inspiration at Ashoka. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberta. Well done.
A new legal theory.